What's the best way you've seen someone rebel against school rules? We had a French teacher who was really bad and most people barely tolerated. It happened a few times that whoever arrived first would stand outside her door as if waiting for her to show up and unlock it, and the rest of the class would just queue up behind them pretending to believe them. Meanwhile the teacher would just be sitting inside wondering where her class was. Edit. To all the people asking if we went to the same school. Pretty sure we didn't. It was not in the US. Funny to hear this happened in other places too. Me and my Spanish class did this once, but the difference was we loved our teacher and just wanted to play a joke on her. We also told her that the whole class was going to skip the next day and she didn't believe us. We skipped except for maybe 3 kids and got ice cream instead. We showed up at the end of the period and brought her ice cream too, and she just shook her head. What a woman. She's like a second mom to all of us. Late 80s, my high school banned tank tops, but they were allowed with something over them. They also banned mesh or sheer shirts, only allowed with something under them. Guy I knew, pretty much every day, wore a tank top with a mesh shirt over it. All these stories about schools in the 80s are wild. Maybe the trope of those 80s movies, where the principals were all boring old men and jerks, is true. My high school in the early 2010s definitely was out of touch, but they never tried to ban clothing or hairstyling. Just after the Virginia Tech shooting, when I was in high school, the administration banned backpacks/messenger bags. Purses were okay though. One guy shows up to school with a purse. They suspended him for 2 days. The next day, most of the guys showed up with purses carrying all of their things. They lifted the backpack ban. Edit. Looks like it wasn't just my school either. Back in the 1980s there was one kid in my school, was hardcore into the punk scene. Had a bright blue, 6 high, razor thin stand up straight mohawk. The principal gave him detention for being a distraction, etc. And his parting words that day were "and tomorrow no more blue mohawk." The next day the kid came in with the same mohawk, only bright pink. Senior year, my school banned jackets. A friend was cold, wore his jacket to lunch, and the VP told him to take it off. Friend pulls out the student handbook and asked where it said he couldn't wear it. VP flips for a while and ends up showing him the "or anything the administration seems disruptive" clause. Friend rolls his eyes, but takes off his coat. The next day, friend comes in with the same tweed sport coat the VP wore every day. Not me, but my friend's dad saw a good 50 years ago. His teacher told him his tie was the most important part of the uniform, and he had to wear it no matter what. That lunchtime he gathered half his school year, and the next day, about 100 people turned up wearing nothing but underwear and a tie. In 3rd grade early 90s, my brother did not want to participate in some sort of multiple class activity. He just hung around the edges until a teacher approached him and told him, "Now dear, you can't be here without participating." Brother took what she said to heart and waited for a chance to slip away. He made it about 3 miles before a family friend noticed him and drove him the rest of the way home. I remember mom being upset at him, but even more angry at the school for taking 4 hours to notice he was gone when they took a head count after lunch. A guy I know ran a campaign to lift my old high school's strict policy on facial hair, which is to have none unless religiously exempt, which they gave you a card for that eye, and probably others called the beard badge. He refused to shave and had a banner and shirts made that said, "With a great beard comes great responsibility." I was in a Christian high school at the time. The day before winter break rolls around, and I had packed a few Toblerone chocolate bars and some notes for the teachers I most appreciated, with the intention of leaving them as a Christmas gift. Before school, the principal made a public announcement that students were not to give any teachers any gifts unless we were going to give all teachers the same gift. This was obviously a bit of a problem, since I couldn't exactly come back the next day with additional candy bars, so I marched into her office to address this issue. Upon entering the office, I made a show of opening a chocolate bar and breaking off exactly one piece and placing it on her desk. I told her that I was going to give her a full candy bar, but I now had to share her chocolate bar with other teachers that I didn't really care so much about anyways. That rule was quietly lifted. Someone stole a key from the janitor. He just left them on his desk. It happened to be a universal key to all the locks, except for the server room. The server room, although had a second hidden door which they found. They came in after school and stole the servers from the school. All the grades and data for the students were on those servers. The teachers had to figure out how to recreate all the students' grades, which honestly they did poorly. Pretty much everyone passed every class. You could just argue for a better grade. Blistering heat to the point of people passing out. We're all forced to wear black trousers. We're dying of the heart and a guy comes in shorts, gets sent home, only to return after reading the school rules on uniform. He is in a school colors plaid skirt. Freaking legendary. When I was in grade 7, our last class of the day, students would always bring in snacks. Our lunch shift was way too early in the day, so by the end of the school day we'd all be feeling hungry. And we were all told by our teacher that if we didn't have enough to share we couldn't eat in the classroom. One day, almost all of us brought in enough food to share, even with the students that didn't bring anything in. We even synchronized the times that we pulled all our food out. Our teacher was clueless. She had no idea what to tell us. There wasn't any school-wide no food in classrooms rule, so she couldn't run to the principal. Finally she gave in to our malicious compliance and allowed us to share food for the rest of the period. In my private school boys were required to wear a collared shirt. It really wasn't enforced until one day it was. I was wearing a sweater without a collared shirt underneath, and I had to go back to the dorm and change. I argued that I didn't look ratty or underdressed at all, but they said rules were rules. The next day I wore a white t-shirt with a collar cut off from one of my older shirts stapled to it. It looked terrible, but rules are rules. Okay, so we need to have clear backpacks, right? This kid puts quite the vulgar image depicting the counselor on one of his notebooks and packs it against the edges of the pack. After 9/11 my school made a rule where we had to wear our school aids. They went overboard quick handing out detention to anyone who didn't wear one. One kid had his ID blown up and put on a shirt. On the back it said yes I'm wearing my freaking ID. He got detention for not wearing it with the shirt. I was at a private school that had rules about the length of boys' hair. One guy in particular always ignored the rule and the administration would tell him to get a haircut every so often, but he never did. Eventually when his hair got about down to his shoulders the principal pulled him aside and told him his hair was twice the allowed length and by next week it needed to be shortened by half. Monday rolls around and he comes in with half his head shaved and the other side as long as ever. We were impressed by literal interpretation of the principal's request, but it still ended up with him getting a suspension for a week and he had to shave the other side before he could come back. A kid was passing notes and the teacher caught him and insisted he had to give the note so she could read it out loud. He ate the note. When I was in high school, there was a rule implemented that if you showed up late to school, you had to go to the front office to get a detention slip. You would then have to give it to the teacher for that period, who would then mark it down, and you were required to go to lunch detention for that day. I figured out by the third slip that literally no one cared, teachers, security, or students. So when I was subsequently late for the rest of the year, I would take out an old slip that I had from a previous detention, walk through school, give it to my teacher to mark down, then take it back to give to the lunch detention supervisor. But I never went to detention because the front office didn't have record of me being late. I was late no less than 50 times my senior year, only having been reprimanded the initial 3 times. I even told my parents about it after I had graduated, and even they agreed it was dumb and funny. Hey Joe, aren't you supposed to be in class? Yeah. One word. Doesn't look like much in text, but he said it's such full acceptance and resolution that the teacher didn't follow up or say anything else. Just okay, got it, you're not going, it'll move on and not waste any more time here. And they kept walking. Sometimes attitude is everything. Sometimes you can say a lot with a single word. During my senior year of high school 2008 my school got super strict about cell phones. It got to the point that we weren't allowed to have them out during any point in the day, not even during our lunch period. They claimed that we would send each other test answers or something like that. Anyway, a friend of mine who was a year below me was tired of the rule and how rude teachers were when enforcing it. He literally looked at his phone to check the time and got it taken from him for the rest of the day. That next week he comes to lunch with two older / non-functioning flip phones. He takes the first out and pretends that he's talking to someone on it. A teacher was instantly on him. They walk over and hold their hand out for him to give it up. He looks at the teacher and then proceeds to break the flip phone in half and puts it in their hand. The teacher was speechless. She just walked away without saying anything. He takes the second phone out and does the same thing again. The second teacher thought it was pretty funny. Flash forward to 2015 and I start working at the school as a student mentor. And now everyone is allowed to have their phones out pretty much at any time. How things change. There was a presentation on vaping last year by some poor woman from an advocacy group or something. After every sentence, or whenever she paused, the whole assembly, all 300 kids in my grade, would give a massive standing ovation. We weren't stopped until we had done it like 15 times. Holy shoot, we did this exact same thing to the Balfour representative guy from this company, who spent an entire hour trying to convince to buy class rings, shirts, socks, pants, etc. Our class is a little bigger, about 900, and we just erupt after almost every word. The guy started playing into it too. He would make dramatic pauses to give us time to clap. Because of the clapping, we missed the only important part of his speech, which was about buying caps and gowns, and nearly everyone missed the deadline. We had to have a lecture about paying attention, and then they extended the deadline to buy caps and gowns. Guy was wearing shoes against the uniform policy and was asked to put on shoes from lost property. He went around school barefoot all day. After the Columbine shooting, our school banned black trench coats. For the most part, nobody cared except the mysteriously gothic trench coat kid. He had worn a trademark black trench coat every single day because it made him different, and then all of a sudden the school tells him he can't do that anymore. So the kid went out of his way to find or make different colored trench coats and wore those instead. My favorite one was covered in duct tape. TLDR, Gothic Joseph and the Technicolor trench coat. My daughters both went to a Catholic high school. My younger one had a bit of a wild streak. The girls were required to wear a skirt every day to school. My daughter did not care for this rule and wore her skirt around her head one day, since the dress code required the students to wear a skirt, just not wear. I was told that she was wearing spandex underneath. That's how my daughter got a new rule in her high school dress code. It wasn't a big defiant act or anything, but I loved it and it always stuck with me. One day in high school, we had a particularly hard snow. We were certain school would be cancelled, but womp womp. No dice. No one was allowed to leave the building during lunch. But a bunch of kids said frick it that day and ran outside to have a big ol' snowball fight. We all watched as they had an awesome time, and a couple of randos joined and I was too chicken shoot. They all got detention, but I know it was worth it. It was so simple and harmless, and I remember it almost 15 years later. Edit, not the same school as you / Kylie 209 haha. I grew up near Chicago. I had a teacher who got into a power struggle with every reasonably smart kid, so we tended not to try in her class. As a result, she began to grade the progress monitoring tool we used. This proved to me that the tool didn't matter. If it did, she would have graded it from the start instead of waiting until she realized she looked bad. So I began to fail every test I took on the platform. She was really angry at me and told me to call my parents, but my parents backed me because choosing to fail is not a violation of any rule. Elementary school had a ban on extreme hair colors. My brother shows up with fire truck red hair. Principal stops us both as we are entering the school and she's going off on my brother. She's berating him, saying who do you know that has red hair like that, without skipping a beat. Ronald McDonald. Principal just grabbed him, dragged him into the office. My 4th grade brain was in shock that he just won up to grown up like that. She called my dad, and he promptly didn't give a frick, and months later bro went from red to green to purple. In 11th grade, now 30 years ago, we were told to use Memorial Day as a weather makeup day from Hurricane Hugo. Us students, and many teachers, felt this was disrespectful and suggested to just add the day to the end of the school year. The state insisted. Very few people showed up for school, including me, my brother, and most of the faculty. A buddy of mine was caught messing with his phone during class. Back then, the school rules were that if you were caught, your phone was confiscated for an entire day and you couldn't get it back until the next day. This was before smartphones, and the rules have changes since the 10 years that I graduated there. So, buddy hands in his phone, but doesn't seem too worried about it. He waits a couple of classes until lunch break and asks me to come with him. He's gonna get his phone back. We go to the staff room where the confiscated phones were held and asks a teacher there if he could copy down a phone number into my phone so he could call his dad later that day. Teacher agrees and gives him the phone. I hand him mine and we wait for him to copy the number. When he's done, he gives me mine back and sticks his own phone in his pocket. He was known as a bit of a joker, so when he jokingly said, "Welp, thanks a lot, sire," the teacher immediately laughs, tells him to stop messing about and to give the phone back. Laughing and joking about being caught, he does. But not really. See, he had a second phone, exact same model, except this one was broke, won't charge anymore, he said. So, when he stuck his good phone in his pocket, it was right next to the broken one. When the teacher made him give back the phone, he just gave back the broken one. It was the best switcheroo I have ever seen in my time at that school. He was so fluent, so nonchalant about the whole thing. It was amazing to see.